Ladies and gentlemen, you ever been in a room full of people and still feel alone? You ever scroll through your phone and realize there's no one you can really call? No one who truly sees you, understands you, feels you. That's her story. A woman, no friend, no circle, no shoulder, just silence. Yeah. And in that silence, she began to break. But let me tell you something right now. God doesn't let you break without preparing to build. See, we all want comfort. We all want company. But sometimes God will remove every voice around you so you can finally hear his, she cried. Night after night, asking her why me, praying without words, just tears. And then something happened, something divine. The silence started speaking. The pain started teaching. The emptiness started echoing something deep, because God doesn't leave you. People may leave. Friends may fade, but God, he leans in closer when the world walks away. She didn't find her voice in the crowd. She found it in the cave, in the quiet, in the space where pain meets purpose. She realized God wasn't punishing her. He was preparing her, molding her, taking every broken piece of her story and crafting something beautiful out of it. You see, rejection is redirection. You think you're being pushed away, but God is pulling you toward him. Friends stopped texting. Good. They were distractions. Doors closed. Great. They weren't meant for you, because God needed her attention. He needed her still, because her voice, it was never gone. It was buried under shame, doubt, fear, and trauma. But when God stepped in, when she listened, that voice rose again. And now she speaks, not to please people, but to praise her creator. She doesn't chase validation. She walks in revelation. Her words carry weight because they come from wounds, her strength. It was born in the struggle. In her story, it ain't just hers anymore. It's for every person who ever felt left out, looked over, or lost. She found her voice through God. And you can too, because when the world gets quiet and your circle disappears, that's not the end. That's the beginning. That's where purpose is born. That's where you find out who you really are, and more importantly, whose you are. So don't fear the silence. Don't run from the loneliness. Embrace it, because that's where God speaks loudest. And when he speaks, your voice will never be the same. Isolation is not a punishment. It's preparation. It's one of the hardest truths to accept when you're sitting alone in silence, questioning everything about yourself, your worth, your purpose. You look around and everyone seems to be moving forward, laughing in circles, making plans, being chosen. And there you are alone in your room, phone dry, notifications empty, wondering what you did wrong. But what if nothing is wrong? What if that emptiness around you is sacred space? What if the silence is not abandonment, but alignment? What if the very place that feels like a prison is actually a classroom, and your teacher is God? So many people equate being alone with being punished. We think that if we were more lovable, more successful, more desirable, then we would have people around us. That friends would stick. That love would stay. But sometimes the absence of others is the presence of purpose. Sometimes God clears the room before he speaks. He turns off the noise so you can hear your name. And not the name the world gave you, not the identity others put on you, but the one he spoke into you before you were even born. Isolation strips away the opinions, the expectations, the comparison. It puts you in a place where there is no one left to impress, no one to perform for, no one to applaud or criticize, just you, raw, unfiltered, and unmasked. And it's in that space that you begin to face what you've been running from, the pain you've buried, the dreams you've denied, the wounds you've ignored, and one by one, God begins to bring them to the surface, not to shame you, but to heal you, not to hurt you, but to prepare you. Preparation doesn't always look pretty. It's not dressed in compliments or wrapped in comfort. Sometimes it looks like tears on your pillow at night. It looks like unanswered texts and invitations that never come. It looks like meals eaten alone and birthdays spent in silence. But underneath all that stillness, something is growing. Roots are forming. Depth is being developed. And strength is being built. Not the kind of strength that shows up and smiles, but the kind that carries you when everything else falls apart. There's a difference between loneliness and isolation. Loneliness is when your heart aches for connection. Isolation is when God pulls you aside for consecration. He removes you from the crowd so he can refine you without distraction. He lets you feel the absence of people so you can know the fullness of his presence, because there are lessons you cannot learn in a crowd. There are revelations that only come in solitude. And there are assignments that require a level of clarity the world can't give you. Think about every great story, every powerful transformation, every hero of faith. Where did it start? In isolation. Moses spent years in the wilderness before he led his people. David was tending sheep in the fields, forgotten by his family before he became king. Joseph sat in a prison, falsely accused long before he ruled in the palace. Even Jesus himself went into the wilderness alone before he stepped into public ministry. Isolation wasn't punishment for them. It was preparation. It was the place where their character was forged, where their purpose was clarified, where their spirit was strengthened. So why do we think it's any different for us? Why do we resist the seasons where no one calls, where no one claps, where no one seems to care? Maybe because we've been taught to measure our worth by the presence of others. Maybe because we think visibility equals value. But the truth is, God does his best work in the dark. Seeds don't grow in the light. They grow underground, hidden, buried, unseen. And just like that, your isolation may be the very soil where God is growing the version of you that the world needs. When you're in isolation, you start to hear your own thoughts more clearly. You start to separate what you really believe from what you've been told. You stop living on autopilot and start asking real questions. Who am I? What do I value? What am I afraid of? What am I called to? Those questions don't get answered in the noise. They get answered in the quiet. And as uncomfortable as that quiet may be, it's holy ground. It's the meeting place between you and the Creator. It's where purpose is whispered, where direction is given, where identity is revealed. You don't come out of isolation the same person who went in. If you lean in, if you surrender, if you let God do what only he can do, you'll come out refined. You'll come out wiser, stronger, softer in your heart, but tougher in your spirit. You'll come out with clarity, not just about what you want, but about what you no longer need. You'll recognize the difference between connection and attachment, between loyalty and bondage, between being liked and being loved. Preparation means pruning. It means letting go of habits, relationships, patterns, and mindsets that can't go with you to the next level. It's not personal. It's purposeful. God is not trying to hurt you by taking people away. He's trying to heal you by removing what's been holding you back. He's not trying to isolate you to break you. He's trying to separate you to build you. This is the season where you stop begging to be included and start embracing where you've been placed, where you stop looking around and start looking within, where you stop trying to fill the silence and start listening to what it's saying. Because that silence, that emptiness, it's not your enemy, it's your invitation. An invitation to go deeper, to hear clearer, to grow stronger, to get prepared. So don't curse your isolation. Don't waste it. Don't run from it. Let it do its work. Let it shape you. Let it show you who you really are. Because when the preparation is done, when the silence has served its purpose, when the roots are strong enough, God will call you out. And when he does, you'll be ready. When the world goes silent, heaven starts speaking. It doesn't always happen in dramatic moments or through thunder and lightning. Sometimes it happens in the quietest hours when the phone isn't ringing, when friends stop calling, when the noise of the world finally dies down and you're left with nothing but your thoughts, your questions, and your aching heart. Silence at first can feel like abandonment. It can feel like everything and everyone you counted on has disappeared, like you've been forgotten. But what if that silence isn't a void? What if the silence isn't empty, but full of whispers from heaven you've never had the stillness to hear? Most people run from silence because they're afraid of what they'll hear. The noise of the world gives us distraction, and distraction gives us comfort. We turn up the volume of our lives, music blasting, screens flashing, voices chattering, not because we're joyful, but because we're afraid of the quiet. Because in the quiet, our insecurities surface. Our doubts grow louder. Our fears creep in. But the irony is that what we're trying to escape in the silence is the very place where God is trying to meet us. It's in that space when everything external quiets down that heaven speaks. Heaven doesn't speak in chaos. It doesn't compete for attention. God doesn't shout over our distractions. He waits until we're still enough to listen. And when the world gets silent, when the distractions fall away, when we finally pause long enough to breathe, that's when we hear the voice that's been there all along. A voice not of condemnation, but of comfort. A voice not of noise, but of knowing. A voice that doesn't rush in to fix everything immediately, but one that reassures. I see you, I know you, I'm with you. There are times when it feels like everything is being stripped away. Not just the people, not just the opportunities, but even your sense of certainty. Plans fall apart, relationships end, momentum stops. You try to make sense of it all, but answers don't come. The silence gets louder, and you wonder if God is even listening. But what if God is not only listening? What if he's speaking louder than ever, and you're just now quiet enough to hear it? What if the silence of the world is God's canvas, and he's painting a masterpiece of revelation? When the world goes silent, that's when you start to ask the deeper questions, the ones you were too busy to consider before. Who am I without all of this? What is my life really about? What do I truly believe? These are the questions that open the doorway to heaven's voice. These are the questions that strip away the surface and take you to the soul. In that vulnerable space, God begins to answer. Not always with explanations, but often with presence. Not always with solutions, but always with peace. The silence can be uncomfortable, even painful, but it's sacred. Because in the silence, you discover that prayer isn't just about talking to God. It's about listening. And heaven is always speaking, but most of the time we're too distracted to hear. It's in the quiet moments that you begin to realize how many times God has tried to get your attention through a sunrise, a stranger's kindness, a still small voice in your spirit, but you were too caught up in the world to notice. You may feel like the silence is stretching too long, like the wait is never ending, like the heavens are shut tight. But in that waiting, God is working. He's tuning your heart like an instrument. He's preparing you to hear what you couldn't have handled before. Heaven speaks in frequencies the human world can't match, and you need stillness to catch the signal. Every second you spend in silence is not wasted. It's training your soul to listen differently. There's a kind of clarity that comes in silence, a knowing that goes beyond words. It's the moment when your soul suddenly understands what your mind couldn't figure out. This is when you realize that peace doesn't always come with answers. It comes with awareness. Awareness of God's nearness, of his hand on your life, of his purpose in your pain. You don't need to hear thunder to know he's present. Sometimes it's the faint whisper that tells you more than 1,000 loud voices ever could. The world is obsessed with volume, louder voices, bigger platforms, constant attention. But heaven moves differently. Heaven speaks in whispers and dreams and nudges of the heart. It speaks through scriptures you've read 100 times, but suddenly see in a new light. Through a song lyric that hits different. Through a breeze that somehow feels like a hug from God. These are not coincidences. These are conversations. Heaven speaking in a language only stillness can translate. And it's often in the moments of deepest silence that the most powerful messages are received. Because you're stripped of everything superficial. You're no longer performing. You're no longer striving. You're just being. And in that state of being, you're most open to what God wants to pour in. The silence becomes sanctuary. It becomes a sacred place where old wounds are healed and new visions are birthed. Where confusion is replaced with conviction. Where sorrow is met with supernatural strength. Don't despise the silence. Don't run from the stillness. Sit with it, honor it, embrace it. Let it do its work. Let it shape you into someone who doesn't just talk to God, but walks with him. Someone who doesn't just believe because others say to, but knows because they've heard heaven's voice for themselves. Because once you've heard it, you can never unhear it. Once you've tasted the clarity of that connection, you stop craving the noise. When the world goes silent, it's not the end of the story. It's the beginning of the deeper chapter, the one where heaven starts writing directly on the pages of your heart, where God stops being a theory and becomes a presence, a comforter, a guide, a voice in the wilderness. The world may have gone silent, but heaven has just begun to speak about rejection as redirection toward divine connection. It doesn't feel that way at first. When someone walks away, when an opportunity slips through your fingers, when the door you prayed for doesn't open, it feels like failure. It feels like you're not good enough, like something is wrong with you, like God has forgotten you. Rejection stings. It humbles you. It makes you question your worth and replay your flaws. But what if that no wasn't a denial, but a divine reroute? What if every time someone walked away, it was God making space for something better? What if that silence after rejection is not emptiness, but alignment with something higher? Sometimes we cling so tightly to what we think we need that we miss what God is trying to give us. We hold on to people who don't value us, chase opportunities that drain us, and force our way into rooms where our spirit doesn't belong. And when those things fall apart, it feels like punishment. But rejection is often God's way of removing what's not meant to stay so he can reveal what was meant to be all along. It's protection in disguise. He saw what you couldn't see. He heard conversations behind closed doors. He saw how that relationship would derail your purpose. And even though you cried over it, he knew that your growth required the separation. When you're rejected, it's easy to internalize it as personal. You think you weren't enough, weren't lovable, weren't worthy. But rejection isn't always about your inadequacy. It's about incompatibility with your calling. Not everyone is meant to walk with you into the next season. Not every platform is meant to carry your voice. Not every place is equipped to nourish your spirit. And so God removes, detaches, detours, not to break you free from attachment to the wrong things, free from validation addiction, free from begging to be seen by people who are blind to your value. Rejection slows you down just long enough to hear God more clearly. Because when the door shuts and the voices go silent, you start searching for meaning. You start seeking answers. You drop the need for control and start asking deeper questions. That's where the divine connection begins. That's where you stop running to people and start running to God. But that's where you realize he was there all along, waiting for your attention. And in that stillness, in that surrendered state, he begins to reveal who you are and what you were created for. God often uses rejection to reroute your focus. What once consumed you loses its grip. You're no longer trying to force people to stay as situations to work. You begin to trust the unfolding. You begin to believe that if it left, it wasn't supposed to last. And slowly, your dependency shifts from others to God. That's divine connection. It's not just about hearing from him. It's about trusting him, even when it hurts, even when it's confusing. It's knowing that your worth is not tied to who accepts you or what door opens, but to who created you. Think about the greatest transformations in your life. Chances are they started with rejection. That breakup that crushed you, it taught you what you deserve. That job you didn't get, it led you to your purpose. That friend who betrayed you, they push you closer to the one who will never leave you. Rejection cuts, but it also carves out the space for something deeper. It breaks you, but it also breaks the illusions you were living under. It removes the counterfeit to make room for the authentic. There's something powerful about being forced to let go. You realize how much you were leaning on the wrong things. You thought that relationship was your future. You thought that opportunity was your breakthrough. But sometimes God lets it fall apart so your foundation is no longer built on sand. He wants your identity rooted in him, not in people's opinions or worldly status. Divine connection is not born out of comfort. It's born out of collapse. When everything you leaned on crumbles, you learn to lean on the one who never fails. And in that divine connection, you begin to change. You stop striving. You stop performing. You start living from a place of rest. You realize you don't have to chase love. It finds you when you're aligned with your purpose. You don't have to beg for belonging. You were already chosen before you were formed. You don't have to force outcomes. God's timing is perfect. And what's for you will never pass you by. That's the power of redirection. It shifts your posture from desperate to deliberate, from insecure to anchored. Rejection exposes what you were idolizing. Maybe it was people. Maybe it was applause. Maybe it was a version of success that looked good but wasn't good for you. And God, in his mercy, says no. Not because he doesn't love you, but because he loves you too much to let you settle. He knows what's ahead. He sees the battles you can't. So he removes the distraction now so you can be equipped for the assignment later. That's not punishment. That's preparation. Some of the most intimate moments with God come after your biggest heartbreaks. When you're on your knees with nothing left, that's when you finally look up. And when you do, you realize he never moved. You realize he was there in every silent moment, every tear, every unanswered prayer. The rejection brought you closer. It made your faith. It taught you to worship without a crowd, to believe without a backup plan, to love yourself without needing someone else to confirm it. Rejection gives birth to resilience, the kind of resilience that doesn't just endure, but evolves. You start walking differently. Not with bitterness, but with boundaries. Not with fear, but with fire. You stop chasing what's not yours and start standing in what's already inside you. The divine connection rewires you from the inside out. And suddenly what once broke you becomes your breakthrough. What once hurt you becomes your healing. What once confused you becomes your clarity. There's no wasted rejection in God's plan. Every no is part of the navigation. Every delay has direction in it. Every removal makes room for revelation. Rejection doesn't close your destiny, it reveals it. It doesn't destroy your confidence, it defines it. Because once you've been redirected by heaven, you stop begging to be accepted by the world. Once you've been filled by God, no human absence can make you feel empty. Once you've heard his voice in the silence, the noise of the world loses its power. Rejection may feel like the end of a chapter, but it's the start of something divine, something eternal, something only God could orchestrate. Her voice was never missing. It was buried under pain, and God uncovered it. From the outside, people thought she was quiet, timid, unsure. They assumed she didn't have much to say, that she preferred to stay silent, that maybe she just wasn't made for the spotlight. But they didn't know the story behind the silence. They didn't see the years of heartbreak that taught her to keep her words to herself. They didn't hear the voices that told her she wasn't enough, that her thoughts didn't matter, that her truth was too messy to be spoken out loud. Somewhere along the way, she stopped speaking because speaking had become dangerous. Vulnerability had only led to judgment. Honesty had only brought rejection. And so she learned to swallow her truth and bury her voice beneath the rubble of pain. But just because a voice is buried doesn't mean it's gone. It still reads, still waits. Her voice was hidden, not absent. It was underneath the fear of being misunderstood, underneath the trauma that left her feeling unworthy, underneath the lies she absorbed from people who were too broken to handle her strength. The silence wasn't her nature. It was her armor. She wore it to survive. She wore it to protect herself from a world that told her to sit down, to be quiet, to shrink. And so, little by little, she did. She minimized her dreams. She watered down her truth. She tiptoed through life, never too loud, never too visible. But there comes a moment when pain becomes too heavy to hide, when the weight of unspoken truth starts to crush the soul from within. She began to feel the dissonance between who she was pretending to be and who she truly was. There were moments late at night when the world was asleep, when she would whisper the words she couldn't say out loud. There were dreams that wouldn't die, no matter how hard she tried to silence them. There were pieces of herself that kept rising, trying to be seen, trying to be heard. And slowly, without even realizing it, she began to cry out, not to people, but to God. God doesn't need a microphone to hear a whisper. He doesn't need polished prayers or perfect grammar. He listens to the heart. And when she started to speak to him, something shifted. She didn't have to filter her feelings or dress up her pain. She didn't have to pretend to be okay. She just poured it out. All the hurt, all the questions, all the anger. And in the process, something sacred began to happen. God didn't rush to fix her. He didn't shame her for her silence. He just sat with her in it. He reminded her that he had been there through it all, collecting every tear, witnessing every wound. And as she kept returning to that place of divine intimacy, her voice began to rise. Not all at once and not with thunder, but steadily, like a fire slowly reigniting. God began to show her the truth she had forgotten, that her voice was never small, never weak, never worthless. That her pain didn't disqualify her, it deepened her. That the very things she thought silenced her were the things that would give her voice power. Because a voice that has risen from pain doesn't speak from ego, it speaks from empathy. It doesn't just echo ideas, it carries wisdom born of fire. God uncovered her voice, not by giving her new words, but by peeling back the layers that had covered them. He stripped away the fear that had told her to stay quiet. He pulled back the shame that had convinced her she wasn't worthy to speak. He gently removed the lies that had wrapped themselves around her identity like chains. With every layer lifted, her voice grew stronger. It wasn't just about talking louder. It was about speaking truer. She no longer needed to be loud to be heard. She didn't speak to impress anymore. She spoke to impact. What once felt like a burden became a mission. She began to speak not only for herself, but for the ones who still couldn't find their voices, for the ones sitting in the same silence she once knew so well. She spoke for the hurting, the hidden, the unheard. And because her voice had been buried under pain, she had the compassion to speak into other people's pain. She didn't offer cheap words or empty inspiration. She spoke with depth, with honesty, with healing in her tone. She had walked through fire, and now her voice carried the heat that warmed others back to life. It wasn't about being on a stage or having a platform. It was about being real, about showing up in conversations with her whole heart, about no longer shrinking to fit into places that couldn't hold her truth, about no longer staying silent just to keep others comfortable. She had spent too long hiding. Now she spoke with courage, not because the fear was gone, but because the truth had become louder than the fear. She had discovered that her voice was sacred. It was a gift, a weapon, a light. God had uncovered what the world tried to bury. And in doing so, he reminded her that nothing formed against her could silence the sound of destiny. Every rejection, every betrayal, every moment she felt invisible. It had all prepared her for this. Her voice wasn't just about words. It was about presence, about showing up fully, about refusing to disappear. She had spent years disappearing. Now she chose to be seen, not by everyone, but by the one who mattered most. And in that scene, she found her strength. Her voice didn't sound like anyone else's, and that was the point. It wasn't supposed to. God had given her a sound that was uniquely hers, shaped by her scars, colored by her healing, refined by grace. And now, every time she spoke, heaven echoed through her, not because she had all the answers, but because she had survived, because she had overcome, because she had found her way through the dark and came back with light to share. She stopped asking for permission to speak. She stopped waiting to be invited. She realized that her voice had always been valid, even when it was unheard. And now, she no longer needed the world's approval. She had God's anointing. That was enough. That would always be enough. Her journey was never about finding something new. It was about uncovering what had always been inside her. The silence, the rejection, the isolation, the pain, none of it was wasted. Every tear she cried was watering the seeds of her purpose. Every closed door was redirecting her steps. Every moment she felt unseen was a setup for her to see herself through God's eyes. She didn't need a crowd to validate her voice. She needed the courage to believe in it. And when she stopped searching for answers in the noise of the world and started listening to the whispers of heaven, she discovered a power deeper than pain, a clarity stronger than confusion, and a voice that could no longer be silent. Through it all, God wasn't distant. He was deliberate. He was preparing her, molding her, speaking to her in the quietest places. And now, standing on the other side of everything that tried to break her, she speaks. Not just for herself, but for every soul still trying to find their voice through the darkness. Her silence has become a sound. Her pain has become a platform, and her voice, once buried, is now a force of truth, faith, and purpose.